going on, everybody? It's Worldwide coming at you with a brand new video, and Happy New Year! The day this video goes up is actually going to be a day later than I usually do it, for a multitude of reasons. One, because I have my Sleeper Sunday going up on the 31st, and also because I thought it'd be fitting to bring in the new year perfectly with, of course, our first tier list of the year. So we did just get the January 2024, it's gonna be so weird trying to adjust to say 2024 now. We got the January 2024 Forbidden and Limited list very recently that goes into effect today as of this video going up, and I am super excited because I think it's a really solid list and it's gonna bring some decent changes to the format, but at the same time it's not like heavy impacting everything to where it's like, oh fuck you if you played a good deck. Not to mention we're seeing Maze of Millennia come out this month, which releases a lot of really powerful cards that are fairly generic, funnily enough, as opposed to like having good archetypal support. I know we're getting stuff like Colorless, the Dark World guy and stuff, but other than that, you know, we got cards like Transaction Rollback, we got Bonfire, we have so many awesome cards coming out of that set. I'm super excited. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for the January 2024 format. Starting off, I want to address the really big one here, and that is Labyrinth. So Labyrinth not only received basically 0 hits on the Forbidden and Limited list, and before you say the Floodgates got limited, they didn't play that, okay? If they did, it was a cheeky side deck option, and people aren't playing the Floodgate Turbo build of Labyrinth anymore, they're playing the Furniture build, which is going to be absolutely insane with Transaction Rollback. I know I just mentioned this card, but let's talk about it a little more. Ignoring the on-field effect, it says engrave, you can pay half your life points and banish it, and target a trap in your graveyard and copy its effect. This can copy cards like Big Welcome Labyrinth to get multiple uses out of it, especially when you get ashed is a really key thing here. Lab is a deck that did struggle a lot if it got Ash Blossom, meaning that it couldn't really dominate as much as it otherwise would, because it would just completely shut them off. I mean, it's a trap deck, so it has a harder time bouncing back resources most of the time, especially for Labyrinth because they rely on using their traps to get back all of their things. But now with Transaction Rollback that you can send off of either of your furniture pieces or even Arion the Labyrinth Servant, you can get it engraved and copy the Big Welcome to use it anyway for the low cost of half your life points, which doesn't really matter in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's either that, or like I said, you can just use it to get multiple uses out of cards, such as getting access to your Lady and your Lovely in the same turn and getting the pop, and just getting access to more of your resources. This card's also going to be really scary when it comes to copying cards that have really powerful floodgate effects, such as Dimensional Barrier to lock out multiple types of extra deck mechanics, Eradicator to call spells and traps, which is going to be really deadly if Evenly Matched comes back into the format. And for decks that aren't quite Labyrinth, but that also want to use the card, Ghost Meets Girl, a Mayakashi and Shiranui's Tale, I think it is, or something like that, which is basically just Artifact Scythe on crack. The deck, I think, is going to be really strong and very highly represented, and it's definitely seeing that in the case of Big Welcome's Ultimate Rare going up in price again. Next up on our list, we have Unchained, and Unchained just got hit on the list by getting Sharvara, the card listed here, put to 1 copy per deck, and I honestly think the deck is fine. Thinking if I want to put it in tier 1 or tier 1.5 though. I think tier 1.5 is probably the better bet. The very high end is going to be the best of the 1.5 decks, and the only reason I say that is because Sharvara helped the deck a lot when it came to dodging cards like Infinite Impermanence or Spot Removal that would not destroy and trigger the floating effects of your cards. This is really important with cards like Tour Guide of the Underworld because, you know, Imperm is a really hard choke point on that card if they don't have another extender, and also having it to 1 was really important because some combos utilized multiple copies, which was a bit resource intensive but allowed them to make a really strong end board, so this will make things like making Caesar slightly less easy, even though they can still do it off the same combo. If I recall correctly, they just have to utilize Shiyama, and so the deck definitely becomes a little bit more fragile. But it's still as powerful in terms of end board as it was before. It's still incredibly grindy in a format where having a grind game is super important. And other than that, other than just like the consistency hit, it didn't really change the deck's overall playstyle. So I think the deck will still definitely be represented, and I think it'll still be a very solid option this format. Next up on our list is Centur-Ion, or Centur-Ion, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it Centur-Ion, semantics aside. So this deck actually saw more tops than a lot of people expected at YCS Bologna, but The thing is, I still don't think it's particularly fantastic. It still dies really, really hard to 1 or especially 2 hand traps. A lot of people are going to actually understand what the cards do now after having a big event against it, and they're going to understand how to hit the choke points a lot easier. At the end of the day, it's basically just a King Calamity turbo deck, which I was disappointed wasn't hit on the list, but I really don't think it's going to be a super powerful deck, like a super highly represented deck, but we'll probably see it have tops here and there. It'll probably help you get like an invite or something if you really want it, or to just snag a top. Next on our list is going to be Fire King, and Fire King has actually started to prove its worth. So I'm going to put it in tier 1 for now. I don't think it's going to be as strong as it could be because we don't have the cards out of Phantom Nightmare yet to really make the ceiling of the deck like explode with the Princess and the Populace and things like that. But I think the deck is already doing very, very solid. So like I said with Centur-Ion, a lot of the time, a lot of people don't know what to do against these decks, and so they don't know like the choke points and how to hit. And I think that's going to come up with Fire King, but I think Fire King, even if people do understand what the deck does, is still very powerful. Yes, if they ash the island, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get your plays going, but that's why you have cards like Circle of the Fire Kings, Fire King Skyburn, other things like that. And then also, you have the Diabellstar engine to go into some synchro plays, get you some more consistency, and you have a lot of space for non-engine. The deck is very grindy, has a lot of spot removal, and just so much floating that it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to actually kill you, because you'll just have so many ways of rebuilding your board and then having a really good crackback. Next on our list is Branded, and I think Branded's probably going to go down to the Rogue tier. So honestly, like I always say, Branded is not necessarily a bad deck, but it's going to suffer a lot from people probably going to be playing a lot of Ash Blossoms to try and combat Labyrinth and Fire King especially. And so having that is going to be really, really rough. But the deck does still do exactly what it did before at best. I mean, it can still make the puppet lock and everything like that. But I'm pretty certain we're also going to be seeing a lot more Bystials as well due to Labyrinth and stuff. And so Bystials are going to hurt the deck pretty bad, even though they can play them themselves. I don't think it's necessarily a bad deck. I don't think it's necessarily a great deck. And this does fall under the Chimera variants as well. So people that ask in the comments all the time, oh, where's Chimera? It's under this, and I still don't think it's great. Our final tier 1 deck of the list, which I probably should have spaced these out better to make it not so fast, is going to be Rescue Ace. And I think Rescue Ace I'm going to put under Lab and above Fire King. I think Rescue Ace didn't really lose too much on the list. I mean, Airlifter to 1 isn't really the end of the world. You still have access to it, period, especially off of things like Emergency if you really want to search for the field spell. And also, like, I don't know, it's like I said, like, losing a card down to 1 just makes it less consistent compared to, like, actually banning it. The only thing they really lose here, considering, like, they were already super consistent with cards like Prosperity and the Diabellstar engine, the only thing you lose is, like, a Dweller line, I'm pretty sure. So I don't really think it's too crazy. I think the deck will probably perform just as good, if not only slightly less than it did before, and that slightly less will probably be from a lot of people dropping the deck to play a different deck, as people start the new year with things fresh. Next on our list is Flu, and I mean, it's still a Shifter deck, and Shifter is still a pretty solid card, but it's not really like a super insane card right now, especially as we see decks like Tier starting to move out of the format. And so really, I don't think it's going to be super crazy. I think it's just one of those decks that it's like, if you can get a top with it, it's cool. Otherwise, it's just kind of there. What doesn't fall under that category, though, is Mannadium, and Mannadium saw 0 hits this list, despite being a very powerful and very explosive deck. It is one of those decks that, compared to some of the other decks of the format, doesn't really grind as well, mainly because it wants to set up a super huge end board and try to stop you from playing the best it can, but it still has some pretty decent grind game with the cards like Dissipator, Baron, just having them summon back effects just super good. And one of the scariest things about the deck, though, is just its sheer resilience. Most hands aren't going to fold the 1 or even 2 hand traps unless it's a card like specifically Droll and Lockbird, which we might see go back into the main deck just because of it. But the problem with that is that Droll doesn't hit the other decks of the format as strong, so it'll probably be bumped to the side, meaning that Mannadium players can probably steal some cheeky wins and then even tops here and there, and I can absolutely see this deck winning a YCS, especially with a lot of content creators and professional players jumping to the deck. I think it's going to be a very high tier 1.5 deck, probably combating Unchained there for that very top spot, though honestly the positions here can be taken with a grain of salt. I think Mannadium is going to be really, really powerful, and you have to prepare for it if you want to survive. Next on our list is going to be Runic variants, and for this I'll talk about specifically Bestial Runic, such as the one that Joshua Schmidt managed to take to the first place of the YCS, and I'm going to put it at the very high end of tier 2. I think the deck is really solid. I think it's a really neat and creative idea from Joshua. I think utilizing the Bestials and then utilizing like the Quests package and like the Eluber and things like that to mess around and get synchro plays and stuff by using the Runic package, I think it's a really good use of synergy. It's super fun to watch. I think it's an awesome deck. I don't think it's super powerful though. I think that it dies to a lot of the exact same stuff that Runic builds already died to. Not to mention a lot of people are going to be on things like Droll, things like Ash, which hit Runic very, very hard. And so you're probably going to see a little bit less success. Not to mention that when you take a deck that's piloted by an incredibly talented player and then you try to put it in your own hands, it can end up being a lot more difficult because you don't have as much extensive testing. Things like Plant Link, for example, which we will get into, but a lot of people try to take Plant Link after it won like 2 European championships, and the deck just kind of completely flopped because it's a very complicated deck. I think the representation is going to be there because it is still that newfangled thing, but I think it's going to take very skilled pilots to actually take it to an event this format and see very high success with it, but I think it's absolutely a deck that you can steal a top or even a win with. Next on the list is going to be Purely, and Purely did get Sleepy Memory hit down to like, what was it, 2? And I mean, that is a hit to the deck in that you can't get Sleepy Memory guaranteed off of your My Friend every time, but I mean, you're still more likely than not to get it. And also, you can just reveal 2 Sleepy, 1 Delicious, and you're gonna get a really strong card either way. Like, it's just kind of a win-win situation. Yes, they can't draw like an extra 3 off the Sleepy and then a 3 off of using Leap or whatever, but I mean, those are kind of like really strong and kind of niche end boards anyway, compared to just making a decent end board with like 1 or 2 Sleepies under something. I really don't think the deck got hit that bad. I think it got off pretty scot-free. I do think Delicious could have come to 2 though, now that Sleepy's at 2, but I don't know, that's just me. I think the deck though is still pretty solid, and it's just going to do a lot because it can just avoid cards like Droll and Ash. Next on the list is Dragon Link. I think Dragon Link is a fine deck. I mean, it didn't really like gain much on this list because Redox is not a card that you'd want to play in here. It didn't really lose anything either. It's probably just going to be around exactly the same as it was before. They did just get Abe the World Chalice Justiciar if you want to count that, and so that does make Draconet the 1-card combo. It gets you like a Spheres plus I think like Lubellian Savage with like the branded Beast or Regained or whatever. You can kind of do like a few different things with it, but I still don't really think it's that amazing because it's a very, very big choke point if it gets ashed or impermed, because now you're stuck with like a random non-dragon monster on board that you use your normal summon on. I think honestly Black Metal Dragon is just kind of a better card for a normal summon, and so it probably won't even see that much play. I don't think there's really too much to say about the deck. Next up's going to be Sprite, and I think that Sprite is going to do a little bit better than a deck like Dragon Link. I think it's still incredibly consistent, especially now that you have 3 starter if you want to play a pure variant. Not to mention you can play like a Runic variant with like Bestials and stuff like that. You can kind of just play whatever you want with Sprite. I think that's one of the really cool parts about Sprite is that it allows so many decks to like be a good engine for it, or have it be a good engine for that deck. And so it can just make a lot of lower tier decks better. I think you can easily snag some tops and wins with this deck, though there probably are just better things to play. Next on our list is going to be Rika, Sun Avalon, Plant Link, whatever you want to call it. And it's a bit interesting here, right? So they just lost the Dryas, the extra copy of Dryas, and the extra copy of, what was it, like Sunvine Healer, right? And at first a lot of people were confused, but I finally got informed at locals the other night that it was because of the new aroma support coming out of Phantom Nightmare, which I completely forgot about, that apparently let them trigger Jasmine like 5 times in 1 turn otherwise. And so I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good preemptive hit because the deck would otherwise become insanely explosive. But in that regard, I don't exactly know how to place this deck because I honestly haven't even kept up with any of the things that it does with the aroma support. Even ignoring like having the Sun Avalon stuff limited, I don't know what it would do with the aroma stuff otherwise. And so I don't really know the ceiling of the deck, exactly what it does. So I'm going to say, because it's going to have a little bit of a learning curve at first, I want to put it, I'll put it at the lower end of tier 2. I'll put it there because we will still see people like Jessica taking it to events probably that actually know how to work with the deck for like with the new stuff already. and even without the Sunvine stuff being there, they probably know how to work with the deck really well. And I think that Rika as a deck is actually pretty solid as well. It has some pretty decent grind, even ignoring the Sun Avalon cards. But just take this with like a bit of a grain of salt, because I don't know how well the Aroma cards are going to affect the deck, especially with the Sunvine cards hit. Another deck that I want to place in tier 2 is going to be Horus variants. I think Horus variants are actually coming up there now. They're getting pretty damn strong. So we can see a lot of different Horus decks. We saw like Tier Horus, we saw the Phantom Knight Horus stuff, and we've even seen stuff like Centur-Ion Horus, Fire King Horus. There's a lot of different Horus builds you can play. My personal favorite one so far has been the Phantom Knight Adventurer Horus build, which I will have a deck profile coming up in just a few days on Friday, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. It got first place out in my locals, piloted by my friend. It was super, super good. Playing with the new ban list with 2 Terror Top and stuff. Really, really awesome deck there. The Horus cards just allow you so much flexibility by putting stuff in your graveyard, setting up the Photon Lord Negate, and just being able to go into so many different options. Not to mention that they're big bodies with inherent summons that have awesome on-field effects. Like, the Horus cards just do so much. The only issue is that Ash and Droll are both going to be seeing a lot of play, so cards like Imseti are just like huge red flashing neon signs like, hit me, and so it can be kind of annoying if you do get hit there. But I think if like your opponent doesn't really hit you after that, I think you can honestly pop off a lot, especially depending on the deck. Coming up next, we have Vanquish Soul, and I'm actually going to put Vanquish Soul at the top of Rogue. So Vanquish Soul just lost their best boss monster, and by that I mean there can be only one. So it means the deck is going to be a lot weaker at just completely stealing wins, which I mean is a bit rough. I do really like the deck and I do want to pick it up someday, but I think right now it just isn't really going to be good enough to like actually see a lot of success compared to other decks. It's one of those decks that requires multiple turns to get the ball rolling, and with things like Labyrinth and Mannadium being able to be super explosive come Maze of Millennia, just making the deck a lot harder to actually get time to set up because they won't have the time, it's just going to be pretty rough for Vanquish Soul. And so I think the top of Rogue is a perfectly fine category for it. Another deck going into the Rogue category is going to be Snake Eyes for now. Snake Eye doesn't really have Populace yet, doesn't really have the Fire Princess, but it is getting Bonfire out of Maze of Millennia, so it can at least do something consistency-wise with that. But it doesn't really end on anything too crazy until we get those cards, and so keep an eye out for next month when that set does come out. The deck will become a lot more explosive, even if the Fire King variant is kind of just better. A deck I felt like talking about due to the ban list is definitely Makonko, and that's actually as, one sec, a Makonko enjoyer myself. I've been playing that lately. Been super fun. Makonko was starting to see a huge insurgence of players because it had a really nasty Acid Golem play, where you'd essentially use cards like Ken and Jen to give your opponent a monster, and to get rank 3 bodies on board to make an Acid Golem. Then you would take back the Ken or Jen that you gave to your opponent and give them Acid Golem to lock them out of summoning monsters, which was really big. Not to mention, speaking of really big, it gave them a huge monster for your Makonkos to crash into next turn to just go for a straight OTK. It was very lethal, very easy to set up too, especially because you had like 3 talents, 3 thrusts because of Ken and Jen just being so potent. But now Isolde has been banned, meaning that you can't get super reliable access to Ken or Jen without having to use your normal summon or something, meaning that it's not going to be as easy to do that. And personally, I think that it's just too unreliable to even think of now. So I really don't think that it's going to be as amazing as it was. I'm going to put it in the Rogue tier. I'm going to put it above Snake Eyes, below Branded, stuff like that. I think it's a solid deck, even if you're just going for like the blind second OTK stuff. I think it has really good protection in this format in the form of the targeting stuff. I think you can easily snag some tops or wins at lower tier events. Higher tier events, I'm not sure though, but it did win a YCS. It definitely was because of the Acid Golem stuff, but I can see the deck doing better in the future. Alright, let's talk about one of the big elephants in the room. The Ishizu cards, the Millers at least, finally got banned here in the TCG. And what does that do to tier? Well, to be fair, the Ishizu cards were some of the biggest, like, gambling, what do I call it? Enablers for the deck. Because yes, the Mill 3s were kind of okay, but as long as you could hit 1 Mill 5, you could usually start going off and just play Yu-Gi-Oh! In creative mode. It was pretty fun. But now that you lost not 1, but 2 different Mill 5 cards, you're stuck relying on your mill 2 or 3 cards. That makes it a lot more difficult to actually start getting your plays going. Not to mention, it means the deck is a lot more fragile when it comes to cards like Ash Blossom on something like a Merly or a Sharon. And I think the deck is a lot more gambly and just a lot harder to actually use. So I'm going to put it in the Rogue tier. I'm going to put it definitely above Flu of all decks. I'll put it... we're getting Bonfire for Snake Eyes, so I'll put it under Snake Eyes. We're definitely going to get some lunatics that are going to be out there trying to make the deck work, and with my luck, it's going to end up topping an event, and everyone's going to be like, actually, in my comments. So that's going to be a bit annoying, but I mean, I'm going to hopefully say that tier is down for the count for now, until we get something like super nasty for it. Good riddance. Next up, we have Castra, and they did just get Unicorn back to 3 copies finally to compensate for a Rice Heart being gone, and it doesn't matter. The deck still kind of sucks. Losing their big boss monster, that was like the only thing they really had going for them, makes the deck almost not worth playing at all, unless you're playing like a Punk variant, you just want to use the level 7 extenders. At least Fenrir's insane though. Orcust Gamers, we finally got Horror back after almost exactly 4 years since it got banned. And the deck still sucks. Okay, so I'm lying a bit there. I think the deck actually is pretty solid. Harpour opens a lot of different avenues for the deck to not only be used as an engine, but also to just play the game, because now Girsu turns into like a 1-card combo into the full old school Orcust combo of like 2 Fog Blades plus the quick effect Symbol Skeleton summon Girsu, and then get a pop off the Rusty Bardich, and then get the Girsu send as well. And it has a bunch of follow-up. The only issue is that there's going to be a lot of cards like the Bystials right now that's going to make the deck a lot harder to play, because the deck never had to play in a format with Bystials, really. And then, yes, while of course you can shuffle your stuff back with Galatea, that is pretty solid, it's definitely not what it used to be, even if you do have the Horus cards to kind of protect you from those sort of things by making things like the Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord. I think if you're a really diehard Orcust fan, and depending on your matchups, you can definitely top an event, maybe like a lower tier event like a regional or something like that. But I currently don't think that Orcust is going to be doing anything really crazy, so I don't know, that's just me. Next up, another big thing to talk about due to the Isolde ban is Infernoble. I think I've seen places say that Infernoble still can do things even without Isolde, but I will admit it's going to be very, very rough for the deck. I'm going to put it probably below Flu, above Cash, because I can see Flu having more representation, honestly. But I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how the deck will perform. I think it can probably still do things, but losing not only the Noble Knight name, but one of the best, if not the best, warrior support cards in the entire game, just super, super rough. But honestly, now that Isolde's gone, I can honestly see Rhoda coming to multiple copies in the next few lists, especially now that we're getting things like Snatch Steal back. So I don't know, maybe we'll see that to help the deck a little bit, but I think that losing Isolde is going to be really, really huge for the deck, and it's going to make it a lot more difficult to play. Our final deck on the list, which funnily enough used to be the one we always started with on our old list whenever it was mentioned, is going to be Dinosaur. And the reason I put Dinosaur here is because they did just get Pankratops to 2 copies, which doesn't seem like a big thing, but that's actually pretty big, especially for blind second variants of Dinosaur. Just having easy access to multiple copies of Pankratops, especially for a grind game, and even off of cards like Double Evolution Pill or Misk in a pinch, feels really, really nice, especially for going second, and to get those extra dinosaur bodies in the graveyard and just really big dinosaur bodies on the field. It's going to make the deck feel a little bit better when it comes to going second. I don't think it does anything super insane for the deck, though. I just wanted to talk about it mostly. I'm going to put it in the Rogue category, probably below Orchid, probably below Flu, actually, because I can see these decks having a lot more representation overall. To be fair, we did finally get Ib back, and this was one of the biggest abusers of Ib back when it was legal. I remember playing like a super nasty like Calamities plus Hot Red Dragon Archfiend plus Spears, whatever deck, but they played like 8 Garnets, but it used Ib and it was like super nuts. The main thing though is that it required opening Diagram and a Baby. The main issue is Diagram is still at 1. If Diagram came to 3, I could see this deck bumping up, not just because of Ib, but just because of how powerful Diagram Ad Litho is. I could see this deck easily climbing to the higher tier of Rogue, but I think right now it's just not anything to write home about. Well, everybody, that's going to do it for my January 2024 tier list to start off the year. This is definitely a bit of an interesting format when it comes to ban lists and new product coming out. We're in a format where there's just so many different playable decks, including ones that aren't mentioned here. I just really wanted to talk about the ones that actually were relevant due to the new set coming out or due to the Forbidden and Limited list having discussions about them. So if you don't see your deck here, then just calm down, it's probably rogue tier. I just don't have it on here. As I mentioned, be sure to stay on the lookout for the Phantom Knight Adventure Horus deck profile coming out on Friday. I'm also going to try and have a Makonko deck profile up before Transaction Rollback comes out, which will put me on Labyrinth as long as I can, because that deck is so fun with Rollback. It just does so many nasty things and can finally play through hand traps, which is nice. It's a format I'm super excited to play in, and eventually I do want to finally go to a larger scale event after the last couple I tried to go to didn't work out, because this format just seems like a lot of fun. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below, because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into recommended, and if there's content or somewhere like the rest of my tier list, and for the rest of my content for the year, then be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, want to support me directly while getting some awesome teaching merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards in the link down below, use code AURORA5 for 5% off purchase at checkout, and support me financially. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.